future, it's such a big title, isn't it, in terms of what we can expect? And I'm going to put all the pressure on you, Jean-Paul, first. What do you see as the economy of the future?
Well, as everyone knows, predicting the future is quite difficult. But if we look in the past, we have some good direction. During the past 3 centuries, our world has been transformed, and it has been transformed, in fact, by one thing, which is knowledge, improvement of knowledge and technology. And I think what most likely we as investors, we should consider that it will continue like this. And therefore, what we have to try to appreciate is where the knowledge is being developed, and then, which is the second part, which is in which human activity it will develop. And the third part is, as investor, how we can try to capture it, or capture those trends. And that is even more difficult, and it's certainly something which requires that we investors, we certainly have to change the way we look at markets, we invest, we are organized.
Now, there's one thing that we're sure of in the future, and that's technology. And Sandeep, I'm not going to keep going along the line, but we can't talk about the future without technology. But a lot of people are finding it hard to value those tech companies because of all sorts of reasons we don't need to delve into now. So how are you going to manage that access to capital and promoting some of the, there's obviously good tech companies out there. How are you going to go about doing that?
Yeah, it's a question that we deal with fundamentally every day. So Prosus, we're one of the largest tech investors globally, and we're operating in over 90 countries. I think from our perspective, when we think about valuations, we have the luxury of taking a long-term view. I look around the room here today, I don't see anybody with a pager or with a fax machine. So I think generally speaking, when we think about valuation, we're thinking about businesses that fundamentally have the ability to change the way that we do business, the way that we interact with each other. And from a valuation perspective, that's typically the approach that we take. Now, inevitably speaking, markets ebb and flow, and we recognize that. And at the end of the day, we're always, irrespective of what's happened over the past few years, when we think about valuation, we think about a business's long-term ability to generate cash flow and its ability to derive value for customers. So that's fundamentally how we think about valuation when we're thinking about tech.
And Alex, I want to bring you in on this because with everything going on in the tech space, it's easy to maybe become skeptical of certain things at the moment, but you're saying digital assets are here to stay.
No, I maintain that, and perhaps to your earlier point about it's difficult to think about the future without thinking about technology. I'd say careful. It's about what clients want. It's about serving clients the way they want to be served, the way they need to be served. Technology is the enabler, but it's kind of not the point. And so thinking of business models and thinking of what society actually wants is absolutely critical. As one of the societal themes that I think we need to address, digital assets are here to stay. Obviously, lots in the news in the last few days, and over the course of the last year, it's been an eventful year. But digital assets are already part of our lives. They're here to stay. I'm not saying they're going up or down. I'm just saying they're here to stay. However, in order for the adoption to occur on the sort of institutional scale that I would ultimately predict, we will need robust infrastructure. We will need conduct of business that is consistent with institutional standards. And we need forces for good to build that infrastructure, operate it at the institutional grade or the bank gradeness that it takes to engender trust from everyone involved.
And this is becoming part of the conversation of force for good. We've heard it through everyone speaking here today, the need for partnerships, the need to do good. It's no longer acceptable to segregate investment from perhaps the impact that has on the environment as well. And Rick, I know you've been with me in COP. We just got back late last night. And within that theme as well, I'd like to drill down on maybe a more macro theme of people are concerned globally about deglobalization. They're worried that people are starting to pull up the drawbridges and become, because of supply chains and various reasons, bring things closer to home. But you're a bit more optimistic on that front. You still think that there's a lot of room for international cooperation between the global south and north divide?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a little bit careful about dividing what you hope for from what you expect to happen. I mean, deglobalization hasn't really happened, but there's certainly been a slowdown in the pace of globalization. And as investors, we were very concerned about that. Now, maybe we were more concerned than we should have been, and profits are still surviving. But particularly when you think about the future economy, the low-carbon economy, it is essential that we get cooperation working, particularly between the North and the South. The South has very significant problems brought about by the physical effects of climate change. And we need to find a way of dealing with that in order that globalization can continue to work. There is a risk that globalization may stop or go into reverse simply because we're unable to deal with the issue of climate change properly, and particularly the role of the South, which is a very high carbon, high growth part of the world, but it's also one that's suffered a lot of damage and is in need of, in a sense, loss and damage compensation, if I can put it that way. So I think the financial system needs to retool itself in order that it can solve that particular problem, as well as the ones that it's used to solving.
Yes, exactly, and I think you want to add to that.
I was going to echo some of your points, Rick. And it's one thing to have companies operate sustainably. It's another thing to have sustainability be the business model, be at the core of the business model of the company. I would argue that there's no venture we should be building or investing in that does not operate sustainably today. A number of the ventures we build on, we go what I call a step beyond, which is the explicit objective is to do well by doing good, meaning the objective is net zero, the objective is financial inclusion, and that's part of reconciling banking, financial services, and society at large.
And I want to bring you, Jean-Paul, in on this, because we talked about these big investment themes, but then we need to get our money out of our pockets, we need to start investing in them and thinking about them. Where we have the trends, but where do you think we should be investing? Where do you think investors will be putting their money?
I think first we should look at what is the current structure of the market, because the markets are reflecting our society. I'm not making a speech in favor of efficient market theory, but if I look at the world equity market today, listed, you have 35% between IT and healthcare. And if you add the different companies which have a high content in research and so on, roughly 40% of the current stock market in the world are invested in technology of the future. So then the next step, you can say, can I go more granular? Can I do more? But the market, it's important to know that the markets are already reflecting the trends that we see in the society towards the inclusion of science, of knowledge in most of human activities. And it's, if you follow in other markets, it's less clear, those are asset classes, but if you look real estate, you have data, you can invest in data centers, in towers, and in many sectors which are directly linked to technology or science. You can invest in a lab, a building which is transformed into laboratories for the healthcare sector. If you look at private equities, they have a significant portion between healthcare and IT, and particularly into software. And so we have a lot of choice already without being very granular. And the next step is that being more granular, but for that I think you need an organization, change in your organization.
Well, we're certainly in a region that's not scared of a bit of technology here and looking at things with a fresh pair of eyes and acting quickly. Talking about that technology, I want to tie it together. I'm going to come back to Sandeep in a minute because I know you've got a lot to say on that. But Rick, energy and technology, again, a very powerful combination in this region to be. It's an argument that's being slightly polarized, dare I say, in COP, and to re-talk about energy and technology in a way that keeps the energy companies at the table.
Well, I think first thing is, excuse me, the first thing is the energy transition that we're talking about is a very long-term thing. And now I know there's a lot of controversy about the amount of capex and where it should be going at any one point in time. But what we're heading for is a world where energy comes to a much larger extent from different molecules and from electricity. And that gives us very different opportunities from a technology perspective. And I think my argument would be there is going to be a much more interesting renaissance of hard science technology, particularly in venture capital, but possibly in other areas as well, because the payoff will be very different. If you think about a system where you've got 100 terawatt hours of electricity capacity needed by 2050, the value of improving that by even 0.1% or 0.01% is absolutely phenomenal from an economic value perspective. So I think those hard science technology projects, some of which are very far out in terms of the probability of success, could have a very large impact. So I think we may see a little bit of a swing, not away from software, but additive in terms of hard science technology, because in many respects that's the only thing that's going to solve the problem. And that includes things like more complex carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, all the things that address the issues that we're aiming at in a more diversified way. Because I think there's one thing the energy transition is clear on, that there is not one single solution. We need to have a constellation of different technologies. But the payoff from getting them right is very, very high.
So Sandy, jumping back on technology, as you talk about, the big theme out there is these international partnerships, it's the energy transition, but it's always, always, always been access to cash, access to finance. So when we think about that access to capital, how do you see that in an economy of the future?
Yeah, actually, before access to capital, just to actually echo one of the points that you just made, you think about the marrying of hard science with software. We're seeing it today in Europe. So inevitably, hard science came leaps and bounds forward with EVs. But today, actually, in Europe, where there's a complete increase in energy prices, the end consumer wants to understand what's the optimal time for them to actually charge their vehicle. That's provided through software. So ultimately, that point, we're seeing it play out day in and day out. When we think about access to capital, we think about that in a few ways. One, we think about it, I think there was a comment made in a previous speech around access to credit. These days, inevitably speaking, with a lot of the software that is out there, it has become incredibly different to underwrite a business model with the access to information that they're using with software day to day. And we're seeing that in businesses that we're looking at, be it access to traditional small, medium businesses, historically speaking, have been starved for credit because the average lender is not able to assess their credit worthiness. And now we've basically been seen in partnerships with large e-commerce companies, how they're selling, we've seen that. The second component of that would be access to capital, access to markets for the average individual. We think about access to equity markets. So we've backed a business in the region, which is a startup called Funder, which provides access to the equity markets for the average individual in the region. We look at equity market participation in the US specifically, it's in the high double digits. Access to equity market participation in this region is 3% for the average retail investor. From our perspective, we're really looking to find out how we can increase that.
I can see Alex nodding his head there. Do you want to add to that?
No, I would echo that. I think you've covered it very well. It's about access and providing ecosystems and platforms that do provide that access. Perhaps a word on ecosystems, which is something about this place here, and sort of with mixing up capital, various sources of capital across up and down in the capital structure, together with startup environment, together with academia, research, and a number of other actors, and creating that ecosystem in a very deterministic way, deliberate way, I'd say, is what it takes to provide that access. I'm editorializing your comment, couldn't agree more.
And Jean-Paul, you said, we've got all these choices out there, we've got all these possibilities to invest in, and then we've actually got to decide which ones to invest in. How are we going to put the slide rule over all of that and actually say, that's what I'm going to invest in? Because the investors are going to give you a lot of trouble if you don't get it right.
Yes, but I will say that if we look at the big theme, you have clearly, you start by knowledge, technology, Where are they systematically implemented? It is in the information technology sector. It is in the healthcare. And if we look at what those sectors have delivered over the past 25 years, they have delivered something like 9 or 9+% per annum, which is quite decent. The market itself has delivered close to 7. And you have already select a part of the market which is attractive. Then if you want to be, of course, within those big sectors, you have sub-sectors which are doing exceptionally well, but those ones you need more structure, different structure to capture them, because you have to be able to screen the market, and you have to use, in fact, much more quantitative approaches to, and for us, the motto, if you want to go really looking at the most attractive subsectors, you have to be systematic, okay? You have to be quantitative, and you have to be very granular. And all this means you have to be flexible, because those subsectors don't last forever, and we all know that. Well, for example, healthcare is likely that it's a sector that will continue to grow for the next, fortunately or unfortunately for the world, but it will continue to grow for decades. And it's as long, because what we have to do, we as investors, that we don't invest in concept, we don't invest in GDP, we invest in earnings and cash flows. And we have to see where those earnings and cash flow will come from.
Right, I'm going to put you all under pressure now. We've got 4 minutes left. There's 4 of you. So I want 1 minute each from you in terms of the biggest challenge, rather than make it biggest challenges, which is a bit negative, the biggest challenges that we need to overcome for this future economy. What do you see as the biggest threats, the biggest challenges that need to be overcome in the next 10 to 20 years? I'll start at the end with you, Alex.
I'll take a specific, perspective from financial services, banking in particular, which is, I think the biggest challenge is that society has evolved quite a bit and quite quickly, and frankly quicker than the banking industry has been able to keep pace with. And our challenge is to reconcile that disconnect, essentially, and come up with business models, ventures, new ways of doing things that reward the DNA banking in a way that addresses that evolution and these needs.
Rick.
I think the biggest challenge is demographic, and how we can ensure that those parts of the world that have young and growing populations are able to make a really good contribution in terms of the wealth of their own country, but also global economy, at a time when those more developed countries are aging and maybe don't have the resources to continue to live in the way that they have. So that really does bind together the global south and the global north. I think it is a big challenge. It's not an insuperable challenge, and it means we need to find a good way through to globalization being part of the answer.
Sandeep?
I think the biggest challenge from my perspective is, how do we incentivize the next generation to actually go out and build the big ideas? They've seen inevitably
I'm surprised you say that, actually.
Well, ultimately, for the average person that's coming out of the market right now, they're looking at the market, or even the person that's at perhaps a highly valued, or dare I say an overvalued startup, and they're looking and they're thinking about how do they want to ensure that they're able to put food on the table for their families. And from that perspective, look, inevitably speaking, we continue to see tremendous amounts of opportunity, but to solve the problems of the future, to build the economy of the future, from our perspective, we need people to ensure that they're out there solving those, the smartest people in the world. So from that perspective, it's making sure that we continue to incentivize them.
Jean-Paul?
Well, maybe I will repeat what has already been said. But for
You're
me,
the last one.
the main challenge is how our society is prepared to cope with those problems, and how we clearly see that we are in a period which is difficult, when you have a breakdown between inside the different societies, and it's something that could deteriorate. I am on the optimistic side. I think that it's a phase and then we will adjust. But for me, it's really the main challenge for investors. It's what's happening, how the human societies is going to converge with the same goals and accept them.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, actually, something we heard in COP27 last week is actually getting people to be well paid in green careers, to sort of tick the boxes that you both talked about that. I think it's so, so important to make sure, you don't have to have a life of poverty if you want to do good. You can be well paid and rewarded for it as well. So I'll just add my little bit on the end. So gentlemen, thank you so much for all your insight today. I have Jean-Paul Villain, the Director of Strategy and Planning Department at ADIA. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sandeep Bakshi, Head of Investment at Europe for Process. And Rick Lakai, Executive Vice President, Global Head of ESG at State Street. Round of applause. And Alex Manson, he is the Head of SC Ventures by Standard Chartered. Gentlemen, so thank you so much for that insight today. Very much appreciate it.